As the home stretch begins, four-star generals and other national security officials who served under Trump are taking no chances, dialing up their appearances and becoming much more explicit in their language. We'll talk about how you should talk about what they're saying to the persuadable voters in your live. Obama rapped, sort of. He did better than I would, but maybe Ravi will try today. We'll see. I campaigned with Adam Kinzinger yesterday, and I'm happy to tell you about it. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney. Is this bipartisan strategy the right one for the final leg of the campaign? Running for president and running from the law may finally be catching up to Trump. Does he have the energy to finish this race? Finally, Ravi gives us an update on early voting. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54. Oh, Ravi, you're on mute. Hey, we're off to a roaring start.
Strong.
There he is.
Here. Well, the big news of the past 24 hours is the story in the Atlantic in which John Kelly went on the record to talk about how he feels about Donald Trump. We got a few pieces of audio here. Let's get started.
What do you think? Do you think he's a fascist?
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. You know, again, back to this issue of, democracy is complicated, messy to operate, probably the worst kind of government there is, except for all the other ones. I think Churchill once said that. And again, our Constitution, our founders built in to the Constitution and to the way our government operates, built in a lot of checks and balances, and didn't design the government to be streamlined and whatnot. So, but certainly the former president is in the far right area. He's certainly an authoritarian. Admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
That was his chief of staff, Ravi. That is a former 4-star Marine general who lost a son in combat and was the chief of staff to President Trump. And he's like, yeah, he's a fascist.
Well, that wasn't even the most controversial thing. Well, controversial is probably a stretch. The most notable things that Kelly said about Trump, actually, it was this comment that I think caught the most attention.
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, sir, first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason. And but he would occasionally say that.
What would he say when you would lay that out to him?
He just, that would be the end of the conversation usually.
What good things do you think I saw one part where he said, well, he rebuilt the economy but look, we can parse why he did that, who he turned that on, all that. But the truth is, I think what bothers me more than anything, and I'll stop if we have more Hitler quotes from Trump. Do we have more? Okay, then let me make my
I mean, there certainly are more, but we don't need to go through them all.
Going through them.
No.
It seems to me that there's one period and one figure in history that Donald Trump brings up on a regular basis with people and seems to admire. He seems to have no curiosity whatsoever about world history, with the exception of, and we'll get to this with the German general stuff, he seems really fixated on Adolf Hitler.
Well, there were all these stories about how he kept a book in his nightstand of like old Hitler speeches, right?
Yeah.
You start to put all this together and it starts to get quite alarming. Now, there's a lot in the story beyond this Hitler anecdote, and I recommend anybody out there to read it. I honestly think if there was one document in your life that if you could get somebody on the fence in your life to read, you just be like, look, just do me a favor and read this one thing, it would be this story by Jeffrey Goldberg, because I think it pulls together so many of the character problems of Trump. And I think in a way that presents a guy who is obsessed with dictators. And we're not just talking about Hitler. It mentions what Trump has said many times publicly, which is that he admires people like Xi Jinping and Putin and Viktor Orban and even Kim Jong-un. So there's a lot of that. And then there's just a whole bunch of disrespect for the military. And I don't even know, like, there's so many different anecdotes in here. I think the one that I think that pissed me off the most was this family of a Mexican-American veteran who was killed, and how Trump promised the family in a meeting that he would pay for the funeral. And then when he was given the bill for it, he didn't even personally pay for it. I think it was that the government wound up paying for it. Trump became angry and said, quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Don't pay it." Later, he couldn't get over it. He said, "Can you believe it? Fucking people trying to rip me off."
Yeah. Okay. There's an interesting thing that's been happening in the country the last several years with regard to the military. After 9/11, veterans and active duty service members were put on a massive pedestal, right? Particularly after we went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And that lasted many, many years. And I would argue, and not all veterans agree with me, that was probably unhelpful to the extent that it happened, right? The pedestal that they put us on. I mean, the thing where, when people would find out that you served, they would just sometimes fall over themselves. And it's very nice that people were thanking you for your service, but there was this heroification of veterans to where everybody who served was to be treated like a hero, thought of like a hero. And I'm down with some of that. But on the other hand, it was problematic because it made people feel like they couldn't have any vulnerability, that it was very hard for people to relate to that sort of fawning over us for doing this job. And now we are sort of culturally settling back into, I think, a more appropriate cultural regard for veterans, which is we are putting people who serve in the military in a proper place of respect, which is somewhere, in the region of like first responders and teachers and, people who serve their community. And I think that that's good. And I say this as a person who my day job is to serve veterans. So obviously, I love my fellow veterans. But all that said, it still doesn't make sense that somebody with Trump's view on the military, his disdain for it, has had the success he's had. And so there has to be something that he's been saying and something that comes from his point of view that some people look at and go, oh, that's acceptable to me. There has to be, as Stephen Colbert used to say, a truthiness in it, a feeling of truth. And here's what I think it is, Ravi. At the center of Donald Trump's way of looking at the military is the same as his way of looking at anybody else who serves, whether they be a teacher or anything else. He views anybody who does that as a sucker. And he views anybody who does that as a sucker because he assumes, because he came from enormous wealth, right? He came from enormous wealth and from a family that sacrifices nothing by tradition. If they have a family crest, it's like sacrifice nothing on the family crest for anybody else. And so he comes from a world where if you join the military, it must be because you had no other options. And I met these people. These people do not solely exist on the right, by the way. I'm sure many of them exist on the right in the higher up in the corporate world, whether they say it out loud or not. They assume if somebody went into the military, it's because they didn't have other opportunities. They don't understand the military. They don't understand that it is a profession. It is not just a job. Like, it is a profession. It's not the draft military anymore. It's a profession. But then on the left, I encountered these people when I decided to join after 9/11. They were my professors. I went to school on the East Coast, coming from the Midwest. I didn't experience this in the Midwest much, but on the East Coast, I would experience people when I told them I was going to go into the military. They would say things like, "Why? You have an education. Why would you do that? You don't. There's so many better ways for you to help." And it pisses me off. And what I think is important when you talk to people about this, particularly if you talk to veterans, is that you access this part, the part where they think that of course we do what we do, because what else would we do? They don't understand that, like there's an anecdote in there where he met a general who he then turned to somebody who works with him and is like, that guy seems really smart. Why is he in the military? The guy was a general. So anyway, that's my bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole piece is peppered with these types of examples, and you go beyond it. He had disdain, right? There's like the sense of, there are the anecdotes where yes, he's like, I can't believe this person would only be paid $200,000 to be a general, and all that kind of stuff. Or this person's a sucker. And then there's like, he was infuriated by the idea that they would fly the flag at half-mast for John McCain. When they were overseas, they had to hide the USS John McCain from him. It's just truly nuts.
Yeah, he went to Japan and they told the Navy, hide the John McCain, which
this is
the Navy
truly
refused
insane.
to do. But that's
Truly
the point.
insane.
The Navy will do it, and that's Trump's thing. It's like, Trump's like, shouldn't anybody in the military be fully obedient and loyal to me? And that's his admiration for dictators. And I remember, like, I've met these people who figure if you work for the government, if you do anything in the nonprofit sector, you must, by virtue of your paycheck, be worth exactly what your paycheck says. There are these people, many of these people, and there are a lot of his donors.
Yeah. Well, another former member of his administration, his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, was asked about whether he believes John Kelly. Let's go to this clip.
Campaign has attacked John's credibility in any comparison of what John Kelly might say versus what Donald Trump might say about a particular event, or what these munchkins on the Trump campaign are saying about John Kelly. You can take what John says to the bank. I'm absolutely convinced. I didn't hear probably most of these statements myself, but if John says that Donald Trump said them, I believe it implicitly. I think it's certainly this recitation of what he's done should be compelling to people not to vote for Trump. Trump said after leaving office, said it publicly, he would suspend the Constitution or terminate it because of the unfairness, the effort to steal the 2020 election. That statement alone, if he said nothing else, if he had never mentioned the words Adolf Hitler, that alone is disqualifying in my point of view. So if people are troubled, and many Republicans are, they don't like Donald Trump at all. I don't like the media commentators who say the entire Republican Party belongs to Donald Trump now. I know plenty of Republicans that will vote for him only with gritted teeth because they fear and they worry about Kamala Harris. I think the answer is don't vote for either one of them, but don't give your vote to Donald Trump.
I know people here.
John Bolton, just sack up and vote for Kamala Harris.
Look, you take what you could take.
Yeah, you take what you could take, but like, John Bolton, man. I mean, this is the same dude who accused me of being able to see through the blindfold in the gun ad.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, I appreciate that John Bolton is like saying what he's saying, and I appreciate what he's saying about Kelly. But
wait,
like,
he accused you? He interjected into the Missouri
Senate
race?
There's a clip on the Fox and Friends or the 5 or whatever where they're all looking at the ad and they're like, you got to admit it's a pretty good ad. And he's like, he's got to be able to see through that blind.
We followed him at the UN, so I knew he was not a popular man there. I wouldn't. Susan Rice took over after he served.
Well,
People
we'll get
really
to this
hated him.
later, but like I campaigned with Adam Kinzinger yesterday, who's like, that's what you do, man. Like Kinzinger, I talked to him, like he still doesn't agree with us on most stuff, but he's like, you got to choose, and you can't choose this guy anyway. But I do appreciate that Bolton has had more courage than, most of these people.
Yeah. One other interesting tidbit that just came out is that Chris LaCivita, who's the co-campaign manager of Donald Trump's campaign, came out that he shared posts on January 6th, 2021, saying that Trump's election lies were responsible for the violence, and he liked a post calling for Trump's removal via the 25th Amendment. And I think it goes to show you that a lot of these people, some of the people closest to Trump are making business decisions more than anything else here.
Selfish business decisions. As an unrelated aside, the lawyer in that Atlantic piece, Natalie Quam, was in mine and Diana's class at Georgetown.
Oh, really?
And she just randomly pops up. She represents the family. She no association to Trump there. But anyway, she randomly shows up with some of these high profile cases, which is kind of fun to watch. But the last thing I'll say about Trump and the military is that he is one of these mostly Republicans who believe that the military is an easy job, that it's a purely physical job. They think of the military as the same as digging ditches, which everybody will say is a physically strenuous job. But a lot of people, they'll say, well, the world needs ditch diggers too, like from Caddyshack. That's what they think we do. They don't understand that it is a profession. That's why Trump says stuff like, I know more about war than the generals do. They just have no respect for the profession. And that's what you should say to any veteran in your life. Trump has no respect for what you dedicated your life to.
Well, I think on a purely political note, we are 12 days away from the election, 13 days. It's a matter of counting off one news cycle after another. And this is a lost news cycle for Trump, just to put it crassly here. Like, this is him explaining. So that's a huge positive. When we come back, we'll talk about what Harris has been up to, including a rally with Eminem and Obama. We'll talk about the Liz Cheney effect. And then we'll talk about the early vote and check in with Donald Trump on the trail when we get back.
Ravi's still here.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us. But what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them. Because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it isn't for those who just have faced major life trauma, etc. But obviously, it helps those folks too. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/M54 to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/M54. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored advice to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism and whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You could also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep on top of your health game. This is really important. I've been running this fitness community for years, and often what I hear from people is, my metabolism is X, my metabolism is Y. But this actually gives you the data to actually confirm or in some ways challenge some assumptions you have about your body. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness levels, better sleep, and it could track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So If you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/majority to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/majority for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. I just splashed coffee right in my face at the perfect time. All right. We were treated to quite the rally in Michigan with Eminem and Obama, one of the many pairings that I would not have predicted a couple of years ago. Let's start with Eminem.
You said you was king, you lied through your teeth. For that, your feelings instead of king. Detroit! What up, though? So look, I wrote down a few things I wanted to say. I love you too. Thank you. I'm here tonight for a couple of important reasons. As most of you know, the city of Detroit and the whole state of Michigan mean a lot to me. And going into this election, the spotlight is on us more than ever, and I think it's important to use your voice. So I'm encouraging everybody to get out and vote, please. I also think that people shouldn't be afraid to express their opinions. And I don't think anyone wants an America where people are worried about retribution or what people will do if you make your opinion known. I think Vice President Harris supports a future for this country where these freedoms and many others will be protected and upheld. And here to tell you much more about that, President Barack Obama.
It's like a perfect little short thing. I mean, St. Joseph, Missouri's own, who then later moved to Michigan.
Oh, he was born in Missouri?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I was sitting, this is stealing a little bit for the one for us, but when I was at the Liberty Game 5, I was sitting in the section from the Minnesota Lynx, and there were a bunch of Missouri people there because Collier is from St. Louis area, and her high school coach was there.
Oh,
and I diffused the situation by telling them that you and I were friends because he knew who you were. He probably thought I was full of shit, but I was like, yeah, that's my friend.
Like co-host, like look it up.
Yeah. Well, you never know with politics. It was a WNBA game, which is, basically it's the same as being at a Biden rally, or a Harris rally. Well, okay. That was Eminem. I think it really started to heat up as we got to Obama here, who actually was more controversial than Eminem, but probably spot on. Let's start with Obama on the subject of Trump's mental state.
The other day he had a town hall meeting. Now, I've done my share of town hall meetings. My experience is the goal of the town hall meeting is you meet with your constituents, with citizens, with voters. You answer their questions. He decided, no, I'm not going to answer questions anymore. Let's just play music for half an hour. So he's standing there and he's swaying to Ave Maria and YMCA. And the governor from South Dakota, she's standing there with this weird look on her face, like she doesn't really know what's going on. She's like, it's like a hostage video. Can you imagine if Tim did that, or Kamala did that, or I did that? Now, our playlist would be better, but it would be. But you would say to yourself, this is odd behavior. He called himself the father of IVF. No, I have no idea what that means. You don't either. He said January 6th was a day of love. Right? You're going to hear this from me. Do not boo. Vote. They can't hear you boo. They can hear your vote. That's the way to send a message. So, look, my point is, you'd be worried if Grandpa was acting like this. Right? You'd call up your brother, you'd call up your cousins, you say, have you noticed? But this is coming from somebody who wants unchecked power. So Wisconsin, we do not need to see what an older, loonier Donald Trump looks like with no guardrails. America's ready to turn the page.
This is the message. Like, this gets to the Atlantic piece. Everything Trump says, I think, needs to be put into that frame. I would say it is a stronger variant of the weird frame, which was cute while it lasted. But what you need is to raise the stakes, because weird doesn't talk enough about the stakes, right? Most politicians, honestly, are weird to the average American person, right?
Yeah,
like, you have to raise the stakes.
Most politicians are weird to other politicians.
Yes.
You know, if you have any doubt about whether the strategy of, in this case, I think accurately characterizing him as losing it, then ask yourself why Joe Biden is not the nominee for the Democratic Party anymore. Because rightly or wrongly, they characterized him that way. And because of his performance in that debate, that stuck. And it stuck, and it wasn't going to come off. And so, you know, Democrats have a tendency to err toward politeness and etiquette, but we also have to err toward truth-telling. And truth-telling says, just like President Obama just laid out, this is not normal behavior, and it's concerning. And by the way, Obama is still just so good. I mean, he's just so good.
I've been watching this guy for 2 decades now, you know, since I stepped on that campaign in 2007 when I was in my early 20s. And this is a different version of him, though, I have to say. Like, I always wondered, like, what would you see it a little bit behind the scenes, but he was even really careful behind the scenes for the most part. He was publicly the same guy as he was privately during that period.
He was more profane privately.
Ish. You know, it's like we could do a whole episode
not in like a gross way, just like he would use shit when he would use stuff in
public. A little bit, but like no, he was such a fastidious character either way. Like, you know, and Shamik and I used to run his call time. So if there was gonna be a version
a frustrated
of Obama,
version,
I was gonna be pissed. We were the ones who would have seen it, and for sure he was mad in the ways that you probably were mad at your call time people over the years. Which call time, for the listeners, is when you lock a candidate in the closet and make them do fundraising calls. And Obama, like anybody else, hated that time period. And especially he would blame us for the time he wouldn't be with his kids. I was 20-something years. I'll be like, what? You think I'm calling the shots here as to why you're in this room right now?
Shout out to Josh Marcus Blank, who has gone on to have quite a career as a communications operative in the Democratic Party nationally. But in 2016, he was my call time manager. And poor Josh, I remember it was Thanksgiving break in 2015. He was going home for Thanksgiving. And I said to Josh, which I had forgotten about, but he reminded me of, I said, Josh, you go home and you tell your family that you must be doing a hell of a job because I cannot stand you. And I meant it as a compliment, you know,
it's
but that's the
relationship
with your call time people.
Ever since that job, whenever I would see him, I would travel around the country to different states. Like, I was in Nevada at one point. I hadn't seen him for months. He literally stopped what he was doing at the fundraiser and came up to me and said, "What the F are you doing here?" That's what he said to me. And I said, "I do not have any calls for you to make." He literally stopped. I was at a rally in Nashville years later. I was running schools, and I was just at the front stanchion thing. And he said almost word for word the same thing. Like, generally try to avoid the guy.
You're like a trigger.
I mean, we could go on. But so speaking of Obama on court, he went at Trump for this appearance Trump did that I'm sure the audience is now familiar with at a McDonald's. Let's go to this clip.
Somebody who was raised in the middle class. She worked at McDonald's when she was in college to pay her expenses. She did not pretend to work at McDonald's when it was closed. This is somebody who believes in the values that built this country. And she is as prepared as any nominee for president has ever been. That's who Kamala is.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's not aware of the reference, Trump and his staff went to a closed McDonald's and pretended that Trump was serving customers, but they were staffers.
Yeah, and there's the For What It's Worth newsletter tracks TikTok engagement. Shout out to Kyle Tharp, who does good work over there. And basically, this was like the most engagement Trump has ever seen on TikTok was the week of the McDonald's thing. So on one hand, you'd be like, okay, this is a success. But then if you peer into what people were saying on TikTok, there's no thorough way to do this, but there is some evidence that this is just people mocking him for this appearance. So,
well, I mean, what else? They're going to look, what a man of the people. Like, no one's going to say that with a straight face, even if you're a huge Trump person. I guess,
believe it or not, I have people in my feed who are Trump fans who somehow saw that as a positive.
Yeah, well, because the point of it was they have this conspiracy theory that Kamala never worked at McDonald's.
Yes, yeah.
And that's why he went there, right? And the conspiracy theory is based on the fact that McDonald's headquarters, national, when asked if they have a record of Kamala Harris working at one of their franchise stores in college, so 40 years ago, 38 years ago.
Records, probably.
Also, they probably don't have records of who's working at their franchise stores in 2024 because McDonald's, the stores are not corporate owned. It's a franchise operation. So that's why if there's engagement that's positive for the Trump campaign, it's Trump loving people being like, yeah, this just highlights the fact that she never worked there. Why would she lie about working at McDonald's?
I mean, it's one of those things that it would work if it were part of some larger frame, right? Like, let's say there's Tim Walz and Walz was top of ticket. Now, maybe that's like an interesting way to close because they have a couple other things on them that they have them what they view as exaggerating or making up stuff. So it's like that would make some sense, right? But in this case, I don't know. Like, I don't know what else they're saying that she's making up about her.
Also, like, why is it difficult to believe that a Black woman who grew up in a working class family from the Bay Area, from Oakland, and then went to school at an HBC, she went to Howard, right? She went to Howard in DC. Why is it hard to believe that somebody with that background wouldn't work at McDonald's to help pay for school?
Well, I mean, maybe to give them some credit, this is what they're trying to do is say that she didn't grow up in working class, that it was more of like a upper class background, which is probably not totally wrong. Like based on some of her
probably upper middle class. Her dad was an academic, but I'm sorry, if you grew up in Oakland in that era, the likelihood is that if you had an opportunity to be in a more upper class family, you probably weren't in Oakland.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I go through this myself. Like my dad is a doctor, but I grew up with my mom.
Right.
So
exactly.
You know, well,
Jeremy just said, I grew up upper middle class and at a McDonald's in high school.
Right. Yeah.
He also said their argument sucks.
Well, Harris also has been doing some events with Liz Cheney. And Liz Cheney said a couple of interesting things that I think are worth considering here. Let's start with a fascinating analogy that she made on the trail.
I will just end this by saying, and I also know, because I have spent time with Vice President Harris, because I have come to understand what she believes about how she will govern, that she will be a president for all Americans, that she's committed to listening and committed to having viewpoints, some of which, come from different ends of the political spectrum. And if you think about how you conduct, your life outside of politics, how we all conduct our everyday lives, those are the kinds of people that you trust. Those are the kinds of people you can work with. Like if you wouldn't hire somebody to babysit your kids, like you shouldn't make that guy the president of the United States. I mean, that's like pretty basic.
It's a great analogy. It's the other side of the coin to somebody to have a beer with.
Right. She's getting at a permission structure, and I think she leaned into it, particularly like, why are they doing these events? Because they want their data is telling them, if you listen to the few interviews that David Plouffe has done over the past 2 weeks, their data is telling us that the most up for grabs gettable votes for Harris are Nikki Haley voters, right? That's what their data is telling them. And there are a decent amount of those people relative to other types of voters. And some of them are deciding between Trump and Harris, which means that it's a net +2 if you convince those folks, right? As opposed to people in our coalition that may not vote at all, or people in who won't vote for Harris but may sit out the election. Those are all net +1s if you win those votes. Harris still important, but a net +2 is what you really want, and that's what Liz Cheney is speaking to in the second clip.
I will just end this by saying, and so I think that we are facing a choice in this election. It's not about party. It's about right and wrong. And I certainly have many Republicans who will say to me, I can't be public. They do worry about a whole range of things, including violence, but they'll do the right thing. And I would just remind people, if you're at all concerned, you can vote your conscience and not ever have to say a word to anybody. And there will be millions of Republicans who do that on November 5th, vote for Vice President Harris.
It's a great argument and true.
I actually think that should be an ad, because I think we know our little bubbles. I know my bubbles. I live in New York, which is like, let's pretend I was a Trump person here. I am not, obviously, but it would be impossible to talk about that with anybody in my life, which means that you got to imagine there's like a flip side and a lot of pressure for some of these Republican voters who have Trump people in their lives. Like the 2016 election was dominated by the silent Trump voter. If Harris is going to win this election, you've got to believe that there are some silent Harris voters out there, and that's what they're trying to get at.
And I agree. I think this would be a great ad. I would like to see a similar argument made on the trail using somebody like Kinzinger, using people like, if you can get any of the generals to go with you. And my reason for that is that, while it's really important, because the most gettable +2 voters, the most gettable people who probably voted for Trump before, or, are Republicans and vote Republican otherwise, are probably women. Most of them are probably suburban women who are married to men who are voting for Trump. But if it's almost +3 if you get some of the men, and so I think that, I would double down on it, but I think it's very effective. And I should say, since in the past, when we've discussed Liz Cheney, what I had said in the past was, okay, I respect what she's doing, but I felt like what she was doing should be just the minimum standard, in standing up to Trump for any member of Congress. But I have to give her props, like what Kinzinger have done in this election, actually going out and saying, no, I'm voting for Harris, deserves a lot of credit and a lot of admiration and respect.
I would not be shocked if next week we get another huge name, whether it's Romney, George W. Bush, which I know you just tweeted about.
Dude, come on, George W. Bush. Like, give me a reason not to hate you forever.
Well, it gets to, you think back on this pivotal period of time that we had when we were coming of age, right? The Bush administration, which obviously was real for you in a whole different way because you served in Afghanistan. I hated Cheney so much more than Bush over those years. And for the exact same reasons, like that, you can now look back and say what drove those two people that can help explain that period of time is helping to explain what's going on now, which is, for better or worse, the Cheneys are true believers, right? The Bushes are cynical politicians. And that's the difference between these two groups of people. And actually,
I don't think Senior was.
Bush. H.W. Bush.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, maybe put him aside for a second.
And maybe W's not. Like, let's leave it to be seen. Maybe he's not just cynical. Maybe he's just wrong.
We'll see.
Maybe he's being cowardly or whatever, or he thinks I did my part. But no, like,
well, he did his part. He according to people close to him, he says that it's like a respect thing about a former president, but he does all kinds of events, and he's endorsed Republican candidates for president since. It's a partisan thing.
Also, President Trump is a former president. He's not the current president. There's not a current president in this election. And by the way, he has done nothing at all to earn the respect afforded to the office, former or otherwise.
I'll tell you, the only hope we have is Laura Bush. Like, my sense is,
and his daughters.
Yeah, one of them has to get to him and be like, Dad, come on. Like,
yeah,
that's
I
the way
agree.
this works.
I agree. Clip this for social media and let's try and get it everywhere. What are their names? Jenna and is it Barbara? Is one of them or Barbara? Whatever.
Yeah, Barbara, Jenna. Yeah, that sounds right.
Please, for America, talk to your dad. We need your dad to come out and tell people that he's voting for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, my version of this would be a Bob Ross style video. Be great
100%.
on social with him just being like, "Oh, hello," and then he gives us the endorsement. Well, with that,
here's a happy little tree, and also Donald Trump's a fascist, and I can't support him.
There you go. All right. Well, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the early vote, which is substantial. And then if we have time, we'll talk about Trump going on Rogan.
If you're dealing with a lot of stress, these feelings don't just disappear at bedtime. Trouble falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, or not feeling rested in the morning, these are all signs that your bedtime routine could use an upgrade. Calm can help you learn to de-stress and fall asleep faster so that you can get restful sleep every night. I need to tell you about my new favorite app, Calm. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Calm knows that everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't about a one-size-fits-all solution. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content to help you navigate life's ups and downs, with programs like meditations to help you work through anxiety and stress, boost your focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Sleep stories, sleep meditations, and calming music that'll help you drift off to restful sleep quickly and naturally. Grounding exercises if you're feeling overwhelmed. These short guided sessions use sensation, movement, and breath work to help you relax and reset. Expert-led talks designed to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and more. I use Calm a ton, and the sleep stories are my personal favorite, especially with this current political landscape. It is nice to have anything that helps you get to sleep and stay asleep. Calm puts the tools you need right in your pocket and can help you dedicate just a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners of our show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off our Calm premium subscription at calm.com/majority. Go to calm.com/majority for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/majority.
All right, let's talk early vote. So to remind our audience, last week we talked about the framework of this, which is what you would expect given what 2020 was, which was a pandemic election in which one of the candidates, Donald Trump, was discouraging his voters from using early vote and absentee balloting and mail-in balloting, that given what's happened now, which is no pandemic, and Trump somewhat encouraging his people to vote early, that now the baseline is more Republican early vote than the past election. Now, how much? There really isn't a baseline to tell. And with that, here's what's going on so far. There have been a record number of people early voting around this country so far, like a significant portion of the electorate. For example, in Georgia, 40% of the projected election vote has already voted in Georgia, and I'll get there. But the biggest trends here, by and large, are #1, Republicans are embracing in-person early vote like they never have before, right? This is a huge trend in this election, while Democrats are, utilizing mail-in absentee balloting at a pretty high rates. In most states, Democrats are not hitting their 2020 levels for obvious reasons. Now, if I were kind of separating out the states, there's actually a pretty significant difference in the blue wall states. Wisconsin just started yesterday, so we have no data there. Michigan has incomplete data. The data that's there is pretty decent on the gender gap side of things. We don't have that much more data there. And also it's very limited amount of data because not all counties have had substantial early vote there. Pennsylvania, which doesn't have actual early vote, but has mail-in and absentee, has Democrats with an advantage over Republicans about 60-30, which is really good. And they've netted about 350,000 more votes than Republicans in Pennsylvania, but it's still below the margins that they had last time around, where they had about a 40% advantage over the Republicans, but still fairly good. North Carolina, I would say, is its own category where it's kind of mixed right now, where in North Carolina, Democrats have a slight advantage, ever so slight, like 10,000 votes in an over a million vote count over Republicans. But Republicans, the last time around, it was the Democrats were trouncing Republicans. So it's kind of neck and neck now. So I would say the states that are alarming me and should probably alarm our listeners at the moment are Nevada, most importantly. Republicans have more votes banked in Nevada than Democrats, which never happens, according to John Ralston, who's kind of like the main observer of the elections there. So, obviously it's early vote. It's only one indicator. But on this critical early metric, Republicans are doing what they need to do. And the rural, basically what Ralston said is out is the Clark County Democratic firewall, Clark County being Vegas, and in is the rural firewall. Well, that's what John Ralston said, which should concern people. Arizona and Georgia have very similar trends, which is significant turnout numbers and return numbers in rural counties and in every way possible that we can tell Republican vote. So, for example, in Arizona, as of today, you have 376,000 Republican votes cast to 321,000 Democrats.
Well, speaking of Arizona, I will be there Saturday campaigning for Kamala Harris. I think I'm going to be joined by our friend Ruben Gallego. And I don't know if this is public yet or whatever, if I'm saying something I shouldn't. I think your old boss, Susan Rice.
I said hello.
Yeah, I will. So anyway, but yeah, man, that is equal parts concerning and motivating, I think.
Yeah, we've got to, and I think people forget this. Before 2020, Republicans actually, from what I understand, did better in the very limited early and absentee mail-in ballots than we did. A lot has changed since then, including the makeup of what our coalition is in theirs. But that is just like, I think, a bucket of cold water to say, like, there's still some significant work to do. I would say, though, that the Pennsylvania numbers, I like those numbers. Like the idea that we still have a 350,000 vote margin there is a really good sign for that state, given that, like, of course, you're not going to expect us to trounce Republicans in the same way. But after all this talk of the ground game they have, they're going to have a lot of work to do on election day if that trend holds. And that is the state you would want it to be strong. And again, we don't have Wisconsin and Michigan numbers of any meaning, right? And those are like, those three states really matter a lot. And North Carolina being close enough right now, that tells you a lot, right? Like, we've got a lot to work with there. Obviously, the so-called Sun Belt states, you'd want those to be better.
Yeah, I mean, the Nevada one is pretty concerning. I mean, any indicator.
Well, Nevada, I don't understand fully how it works, but from what I understand, like, more voting happens before election day than anywhere else. I don't completely understand the mechanics of it, but Ralston, who everybody respects, and I've interviewed him before. He's a Buffalo Bills fan, by the way. He seems alarmed. I take that seriously, and he's a Democrat, so like, there's no reason to spin.
Yeah, well, and it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, if you think about who has been moving to Nevada, particularly to like Reno and like the Nevada side of the Tahoe area, like, who's been moving there over the last several years? Probably more conservative leaning Californians.
Right.
And so that's a natural, that's probably a natural trend for Nevada. So it's something to be worried about. So meanwhile, okay, so Trump, he is going on Rogan.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I mean, I gotta look this up, but I think it's Friday. Yeah, I hadn't looked at this again, and there was talk of, yeah. So it looks like he's going on there Friday. There hasn't been any sense yet about whether Harris. There was rumors that she was going to go on there, but that's a big audience for Trump. It's like 11 million listeners, I think, on a normal podcast.
Okay, so here's my prediction for how that will go. I think it will be helpful to Trump with his base, with the people that Trump is just like we talked about earlier, the people who are up for grabs in this election, and this is, I think, a good thing, in terms of how they're going to vote, if they're definitely going to vote, are for the most part conservative leaning people. Or demographically, right? They're mostly white. They, like, in terms of the undecided voters, they're mostly white, and they are mostly people who would consider voting for Trump and who the Trump campaign would consider to be, more of their expected demographic. They're probably mostly suburban. Some of them are rural. So for Kamala, she's going after the women in that group, right? That's hence campaigning with a Republican woman in Liz Cheney. Trump is trying to shore up, I believe, his vote among like independent but conservative leaning men. So that makes a lot of sense for him to go on Rogan. My prediction for it is that it will help him with that demographic. It'll help him with like low information bros, like who are just going to start thinking, if to the extent they will think about it, about who they're going to vote for in the last 2 weeks, and whose friends are mostly, if they're voting for Trump, and who make off-color jokes at the gym and stuff like that. It'll help him with them. But in furtherance of helping him with that group, as he undoubtedly bros out with Joe Rogan and becomes probably overly comfortable in what could be a 2-hour conversation, I do think he will also probably take on some water with the other side of that demographic, with women, which then leaves you wondering whether it makes sense for Kamala to go on there to try and eat into any of that.
I think, of course, like, you got to imagine, like, any good she does is net for her. And it's like, it's like as if, like, it would be if Trump went on Call Her Daddy. It's like, it's not like there are a lot of his people on that pod. So
yeah, but if he went on there, the viral moments with him would be devastating for him.
Yeah,
with women. And that's what I'm saying is, like, if Joe Rogan just decides to go at her, and with his audience in mind, which are mostly dudes our age and younger, it could become a liability. If they have a long conversation, if they end up spending an hour and a half talking about trans issues, I don't think that helps her.
Yeah, I think part of it is we're in the trust the candidate phase of this. Like, she's got to close. It's like the quarterback.
I trust her to handle that conversation great. She can't control what the conversation will be about. Point.
I think it's like, to me, it's like 2-minute drill, ball in the hand of the quarterback. You just got to let it fly. Like, that's how I feel right now. It's like, it's too close to turn down any audience. And I think at that point, if she has a bad moment, people will chalk it up to like the Fox News. Like, I don't think she had bad moments on Fox News, but like, people would understand it if, like, they don't think of Rogan as her audience. So like, if it's weird or tough, and it actually would be really good if she had the last word with that audience.
I think I'm with you on saying exactly. I like the way you put it. Like, give the ball to your best player. I totally agree. I'm just saying, in politics, the difference is that when she went on Fox, you've got what did she? I don't remember how much time they had, but you have and that with Fox, like, they still see themselves as some version of journalism. So Bret Baier, he won't spend the entire time talking about a singular thing. With Rogan, you don't know.
But you got to trust that she can answer that, right? Like, what she's going to say is like, how much is this affecting, like, listener, like, out there?
Yeah,
like,
you're right. She'll handle it fine.
If you've been personally affected by this, then let it like move your vote one way or the other. And here's what I think about it. But if it doesn't personally affect you, let me talk about what does. And I think the other piece is, if she were to turn it down, that would be really bad now, because then he would get on the pod and say, she's ducking me at a time when Trump is ducking everything but this interview. He's now turned down he's canceled how many events over the past 2 weeks, like a lot of stuff. So you don't want to mess with that talking point that Trump is hiding in a basement at the end of this.
There's also a non-zero chance that she'll charm Rogan.
Yeah, I agree. Rogan can be a softie. Now, you're going to guarantee that he's going to get questions from RFK Jr., from Ben Shapiro, from whatever random, Alex Jones or whatever. But honestly, I think that works to her advantage. You prepare her right. like her team should know what the fringe points are. They should be watching Rogan to know what things he cares about or not. And like a smart Harris, which I imagine they're going to prepare well for this, will be like, look, I've heard what you've said about X, Y, and Z. You're a libertarian on this, you're a libertarian on that. Let me tell you how, like, yada, yada, yada. And if they, and he's going to come at her about how prepared she is and all that. I've already heard how she's handled it before. She talks about how that's like really important.
Discipline.
Right.
She's
but
like,
also
yes, I have discipline.
She can show that she can be off the cuff at times. And I think the easiest thing for her is just to be like, look, everybody changes their minds about stuff. You've changed your mind about how many things on this podcast. You had Donald Trump. He contradicts himself in the same sentence. So like, you got to give me a little bit of grace here,
Yeah.
Like, and the thing is, like, she's got to get caught trying. Like, this is the last phase of the campaign. You take as many big audiences as you can. Like, hell, if fucking Alex Jones invited her out, and I would say do it. Like, just anybody out there, just get out there, talk to as many people as you can, and give them a reason to be concerned. And if she gets the final word on Rogan, that's playing offense.
Yeah. All right. I'm sold. She should go on there. So she has been hitting him on these cancellations, right? He's canceled. Let's see.
That's why that's more than anything. She can't forfeit that talking point.
Yeah.
That's an important talking point.
Yeah. I mean, so because he's canceled interviews with 60 Minutes, NBC, CNBC, even an NRA event in Georgia, a Make America Healthy town hall with RFK, plus he's refusing to debate. Like I said at the top, simultaneously running for president while running from the law, and running for president because you're running from the law, and being 70, what is he, 78 years old? Something, that's going to wear you out. And the dude is exhausted. And
he looks terrible, honestly. And he's like
Yeah.
falling asleep in events, the ones that he does show up to.
There's no joy. He has no joy whatsoever.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't have any joy watching him either, Jason. So let's end this soon.
Yeah. But all right. So we have a clip of her going after him for this.
Oh, yeah. Let's a good place to end.
Well, we're back in Michigan, and it's good to be back. And again, we have a situation where the former president is insulting the people of the state, this time saying that auto workers, that their important and good and highly skilled work could be performed by a child, which is just further evidence that Donald Trump comes from a place where he really does not appreciate or understand how most people in our country work very hard for all that they have, and that there is great dignity in their work. In addition, I've been hearing reports that his team at least is saying he's suffering from exhaustion. And that's apparently the excuse for why he's not doing interviews. And of course, he's not doing the CNN town hall. He refuses to do another debate. And, look, being president of the United States is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And so we really do need to ask if he's exhausted being on the campaign trail. Is he fit to do the job? And I think that's a question that is an open-ended question that he needs to answer.
First of all, great argument, great point, great closing argument. But also, to circle back to the beginning of the show, her point about what he said about auto workers is that's it. That's how he feels about anybody who doesn't make massive amounts of money. Military, auto workers, whatever. He really believes that cars can be assembled and cars can be built by children. Have you ever been to a UAW plant?
No.
It is serious stuff. If you do not know what you're doing, and if you're not fluent in what all the machines do, you will get killed in there. It is skilled work. So anyway, it's a good place to bookend the whole thing.
Well, one for us. What's happening in your world? You have a truck.
I got the truck that I talked about last week. We drove to, my son and I, we drove to Davenport, Iowa, which is about 5 to 5.5 hours away. We drove what was our truck. We had a 2013 F-150. So we loved the truck. The truck's name was Big Bird. True had named it Big Bird. And we got a truck that, I will be honest, it's a 2018 F-150 Raptor. And it's like a performance package. And it is, I will be the first to tell you, completely unnecessary. And the first purchase that I'm 43 years old. And I'm now, for the first time, I've always been like public service guy or nonprofit guy. My wife, as you know, does pretty well in her work, and I'm, anyway, I've never bought anything like this. I've never bought anything top of the line. And I got to say, there is a difference, man. I'm driving around in this thing, which Bella has named Candyland. That's the name of the new truck. And it is sweet. And it was a really fun road trip with True.
It looks amazing. I gotta check it out. It's automatic or stick? I imagine
it's automatic.
Oh, good. Okay.
But we stopped in Des Moines to do a canvas launch for Lenon Bakam's campaign for Congress, but also because they have the largest skate park in the world there. And as you know, True has gotten into skateboarding the last couple of months, and he's getting pretty good at it. So that was fun. It was just a great road trip with True. But when we pulled up to the dealership and saw our, what was about to be our truck sitting there, True just goes, "Dad," I'm outing him as cussing at the age of 11, but I always tell him it's okay when you're with me and you do it correctly. And he just goes, "Dad, holy shit." And I was like, yeah. And then we test drove it. And he said to me, he goes, "Dad, I think we should take really good care of this truck." And I was like, "I agree." And he said, "From now on, when we spit sunflower seeds in the car, we should always spit them into a cup," which, by the way, I've been trying to get him to do for a long time. He spits them out the window, and I'm like, "I agree, True." So anyway, it's been fun.
Amazing. That's amazing. I don't have too much to report myself. I've been battling a really bad cold. I snuck out to go see Game 5 of the Liberty with Hodari and a few others. And,
what an awesome game!
Unbelievable. I thought for sure they're going to lose at halftime. They did not. Nothing was landing for them. They were missing tons of layups. But it was like a crazy, crazy atmosphere. That is definitely one of my favorite fan bases. It certainly dwarfs the Brooklyn Nets. I'll put you that way. That was really cool. But I've been kind of locked up just trying to, cold, sometimes a cold can last forever. This one seems to just be coming and going with a vengeance. And so I found, you remember the show Northern Exposure?
Yeah.
Remember the show? So it had been, for a long time, you could never get it for some reason, the rights disputes, there was a rights dispute going on. And so, but I found it finally. I think they just put it up on Amazon. So I started watching it, bringing it back to our childhood. It was a show that I vaguely remember really liking. And now I'm watching it with adult eyes and I'm like, this show is amazing. But I was watching the second episode and it says written by Stuart Stevens. And I'm like, that can't be the same Stuart Stevens that we know from politics. And I looked it up and it is Stuart Stevens. He was the writer on Northern Exposure. And he didn't write all the episodes, but he wrote what I think so far is my favorite episode. It was ahead of its time, this show, and it was thematic. And this episode 2 is about pride. And it's such a beautifully written episode. I'm like, wow, this guy is
well, really it's interesting because Mike Murphy has done a lot of TV writing too, I think, right?
Yeah. But his stuff, I think, is specific to politics, which is why I think Stuart Stevens is a very impressive guy. I'm like, it's a beautifully written episode. And so, anybody who writes on that show, I respect, because the radio host, if you remember, they have this radio host who has this poetic style to him. I
watched maybe a couple episodes a long time ago. I just remember, I don't remember the name of the woman. She had short black hair.
Yes. She's the love interest. Yeah.
I just remember being in junior high and being like, wow, she is the most beautiful.
Yeah, she's a total babe. I think she dated a bunch of famous people too. She was I think a sex symbol of the early 90s.
It probably influenced my choice of mate long term. I mean, she when I met Diana, she had short hair like that. Anyway.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
There's a resemblance there, I feel like.
Well, to our listeners, if you're looking for a feel good something, I know a lot of you are sick right now. I highly recommend it. It is a fun little show and way ahead of its times in terms of the depth of a sitcom-y type of show from the early 90s. So that's
all right. That's Ravi's hot take, which is Northern Exposure. Good show.
Yeah, it's helped me get through.
This is kind of like a throwback to we used to do Quarantine Corner.
Dude, being sick with a cold is the worst because it's just enough that you could convince yourself that you can go work out or something, and then I'll go work out and it'll make me way worse for a couple of days.
Pull something.
Yeah. Whereas if you just have something serious like the flu, you're not even under any illusions that.
You do have something serious, Ravi. You have a man cold, and as I tell my wife on a regular basis, particularly 2 weeks ago when we were sick at the same time, look, I have a man cold.
Yeah, it's worse.
Worse. Yeah. I mean, it's science.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
It is for sure worse.
All right, we'll leave it on that. That'll make people mad. All right, please leave a 5-star review where you tell me how right or wrong I am about the man cold argument. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. You can find me on social media at Jason Kander. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.